The morning sun bled over the horizon of Independence, Missouri, casting long, spindly shadows across the dusty thoroughfare. To Silas Thorne, the town smelled of manure, coal smoke, and desperate ambition. He stood before the iron gates of Judge Cornelius Vance's estate, a sprawling monument to Eastern wealth that looked entirely out of place on the rugged edge of the frontier. The white pillars seemed to sneer at the muddy boots of the men passing by on the street. Silas adjusted the brim of his battered Stetson, his thumb brushing the worn leather of his gun belt. He checked the letter in his vest pocket one last time. Experienced guide needed. Escort duty to Colorado Territory. High wages. Silas hadn't seen a high wage in 6 months. Between the poker tables in St. Louis and a failed mining stake in the Dakotas, he was scraping the bottom of the barrel. He knocked on the heavy oak door. A butler, stiff as a board and looking at Silas as if he were something the cat dragged in, ushered him into a study that smelled of mahogany and expensive tobacco. Judge Vance sat behind a desk wide enough to sleep a family of 4. He was a man carved from granite, silver-haired and sharp-eyed. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said, not bothering to stand, "your reputation is colorful. Ex-Union cavalry, scout for the humiliating Powder River expedition, and a survivor of the Cimarron ambush." "That was a lifetime ago, Judge," Silas said, his voice like gravel grinding in a churn. "I'm just a man looking for honest work." "I need a man who can kill, Mr. Thorne. Is that honest enough for you?" Silas held the judge's gaze. "Depends on who needs killing. My daughter, Eleanor, is to be married to Reginald Sterling of the Sterling Silver Syndicate in Denver City. It is a merger as much as a marriage. It will secure water rights for the next century. You are to get her there in 6 weeks. $200 now, $200 upon delivery. $400. It was a fortune. It was enough to buy a small ranch in California and forget the world existed. "Deal," Silas said. "One thing, Thorne," the judge added, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Eleanor is spirited. She believes she is a modern woman. She is not. She is an asset to this family. You will deliver her safely. Failure means I hunt you down. Do we understand each other?" Crystal clear. The departure the next morning was a spectacle. A pristine Studebaker wagon, loaded with enough trunks to clothe a regiment, waited in the drive. And there she was. Eleanor Vance stood on the porch steps, looking like a porcelain doll wrapped in expensive blue wool. She had hair the color of autumn leaves, a deep burning auburn, pinned up in a style that screamed Boston society. Her eyes were blue, sharp, and currently blazing with fury. "I will not go with this ruffian," Eleanor shouted at her father. "You will go, and you will marry Reginald Sterling, and you will be grateful." "The Judge barked back. Silas rode up on midnight, his black gelding. He tipped his hat. "Morning, ma'am. Best get in the wagon. We're burning daylight." Eleanor turned her gaze on him. It was like standing in front of a blizzard. "I am not a package to be shipped, Mr. Thorne." "Could have fooled me," Silas drawled. "The way your father talks, you're worth your weight in silver bullion. Now, are you climbing up, or do I have to tie you to the roof?" She gasped. Her maid, a terrified young girl named Bessie, squeaked in horror, but Eleanor climbed in. As the wagon rolled out of Independence, Silas felt a prickle on the back of his neck. He glanced at the rooftops. Nothing. But the feeling remained. The war had given him a sixth sense for danger, and right now, the air felt heavy. The first week was a lesson in misery. Eleanor refused to speak to him. She sat rigid in the wagon, clutching a parasol, trying to shield her complexion from the relentless prairie sun. It wasn't until they hit the Cimarron cutoff that the facade cracked. They had stopped for a midday meal. Silas was brewing coffee, a sludge-like substance he called trail mud, over a cow chip fire. Eleanor approached, her blue dress already stained with dust. "Is it always this vast?" she asked, her voice quiet. She was looking out at the sea of grass that stretched to the horizon. "It's the only place left where a man can hear himself think," Silas muttered. "Or a woman." "I don't want to hear myself think, Mr. Thorne. My thoughts are not pleasant company lately." She accepted the tin cup of coffee he offered. She took a sip and grimaced. "Good heavens, do you tan leather with this?" "Keeps you awake," Silas grinned. It was the first time he'd smiled in days. Sterling's a lucky man, getting a woman with spirit. Most society girls would have fainted by Council Grove. Sterling isn't looking for spirit, he's looking for a trophy. She looked at him, her eyes vulnerable for a split second. My father is selling me, Silas. Let's call it what it is. Before Silas could respond, the wind changed. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in a minute. The blue sky to the north turned a bruised purple. Storm coming, Silas barked. Get in the wagon. Bessie, cover your head. He barely had time to secure the mules before the wall of dust hit. It wasn't just wind, it was a physical assault. The sky turned black. Silas huddled against the wagon wheels, his bandana over his face, midnight whinnying and terror beside him. For 3 hours, the world was nothing but grit and noise. When the wind finally died, they were half buried in a dune of silt. Silas shook himself off and checked the wagon. Eleanor and Bessie were shaken, but unharmed. But as the dust settled, the silence of the prairie was broken by the click of a hammer cocking. Nice wagon, a voice rasped. Silas froze. He turned slowly. 3 men sat on horseback 20 yards away. They wore dusters and scarves. The leader had a scar running through his eyebrow and a gaze like a dead fish. Red Jack Kincaid, Silas said, recognizing the outlaw from wanted posters in Kansas City. Thorne, Kincaid nodded. Long way from the army. We'll take the horses and the women. You can walk. Over my dead body, Silas said, his hand hovering over his Colt. That can be arranged. The standoff lasted a heartbeat. Then Eleanor did the unthinkable. She leaned out of the wagon, holding Silas's spare Winchester rifle, which she had clearly grabbed during the storm, and leveled it at Kincaid. Leave, she commanded. Her voice shook, but the barrel didn't waver. Kincaid laughed. Look at that. The kitten has claws. I said leave, she fired. The shot went wide, kicking up dirt near Kincaid's horse, startling the beast. The horse reared. In that split second of confusion, Silas drew. Bang! Bang! One bandit fell. Kincaid cursed, firing a wild shot that pinged off the wagon wheel and wheeled his horse around. This ain't over, Thorne. Sterling ain't the only one interested in that cargo. Kincaid and his remaining man galloped off into the haze. Silas holstered his gun, his heart hammering. He looked at Eleanor. She was pale, the rifle slipping from her fingers. You okay? He asked, stepping to the wagon. I almost killed a man, she whispered. You saved our lives, Eleanor. He used her first name without thinking. Where did you learn to hold a rifle? I didn't. She looked at him, eyes wide. I just knew I wasn't going to let them take me. From that moment, the dynamic shifted. The wall between guide and cargo crumbled. That night, camped under the stars near Pawnee Rock, Silas taught her how to actually shoot. He stood behind her, correcting her stance, his chest brushing her back. The scent of her, lavender and dust, filled his head. Squeeze, don't pull, he murmured, his hand over hers on the pistol grip. Like a heartbeat. She fired. The tin can on the fence post spun away. She turned to him, her face flushed with triumph, and for a moment, they were inches apart. The air between them crackled with more electricity than the earlier storm. Tell me about her, Eleanor said softly, lowering the gun. Who? The woman you see when you look at the fire. You have a ghost, Silas. I can see it in your eyes. Silas sighed, stepping back. Hannah. She was a schoolteacher in Ohio. I promised her I'd come back after the war. I came back different, broken. I couldn't inflict myself on her. So I left. Found out a year later, she died of influenza. You carry a lot of guilt for a man who did what he thought was right. Right don't keep you warm at night, Eleanor. As they pushed deeper into the Colorado territory, the landscape turned from flat prairie to the jagged red-toothed maw of the mountains. The bond between them grew. They talked of books, of war, of the emptiness of society ballrooms, and the brutality of the frontier. But the frontier wasn't done with them. In the Rayton Pass, tragedy struck. Kincaid had been tracking them. He triggered a rock slide in a narrow canyon. The roar was deafening. Silas tackled Eleanor, throwing her under the overhang of a cliff as the world came crashing down. When the dust cleared, the wagon was crushed, and Bessie was gone, buried under tons of granite. Eleanor screamed, clawing at the rocks until her fingers bled, but Silas had to pull her away. She's gone, Elle. She's gone. They were left with 2 horses, a bedroll, and their weapons. The luxury was gone. The survival began. Eleanor cut her heavy skirts with Silas's Bowie knife to make them rideable. She braided her hair tight. She hardened. "We aren't going to Denver," Silas said that night, huddled in a small cave as rain lashed the mountains. "Kincaid is being paid by someone. Simple bandits don't ambush like that. They rob and run. This is a hit." "Who?" Eleanor asked, shivering against him. "You mentioned Sterling. Does he have enemies?" "Thaddeus Holt," she realized. "The railroad baron. He wants the water rights too. If the marriage fails, if I die, then Holt moves in." Silas checked his revolver. "We need to get to Trinidad. Sterling is there meeting your father's lawyers. We bring him the fight." The journey to Trinidad was a blur of exhaustion. They were hunted. They encountered a hunting party of Ute warriors, and Silas traded his prized pocket watch for safe passage through secret trails, leaving Kincaid's men searching empty canyons. In those high mountains, under a canopy of stars so bright they hurt to look at, they finally broke. "I can't marry him," Eleanor whispered into the darkness. "Not after this. Not after seeing what real strength looks like." Silas turned to her. "Elle, I'm a nobody. I have a horse and a gun and bad memories. You have honor, Silas, and you have me." She kissed him. It wasn't tentative. It was acclaiming. A desperate embrace of life in the face of death. That night, the boundaries of class and duty dissolved completely. They arrived in Trinidad like ghosts, dusty, ragged, and dangerous. They found Reginald Sterling in the grand suite of the Columbian Hotel. He was a small, manicured man who looked at Eleanor's trail-worn appearance with distaste. "My dear," Sterling sniffed, "you look dreadful. And where is the maid?" "Dead," Eleanor said, her voice like steel. "Murdered by Thaddeus Holt's men." Sterling's eyes widened. "Holt? Impossible." "Is it?" Silas stepped forward, hand on his gun. "Kincaid is in town. We saw his horse at the saloon. He's meeting someone. We catch him, we get the truth." They set the trap. Eleanor played the bait, walking openly through the town square. Kincaid took the lure, cornering her in the livery stables. But he didn't expect Silas in the loft. "Drop it, Kincaid!" Silas roared. Kincaid spun, firing. Silas dropped from the loft, tackling the outlaw. They rolled in the straw, fists flying. It was a brutal, ugly fight. Kincaid drew a knife, slashing Silas's arm, but Silas managed to jam the barrel of his Colt under Kincaid's chin. "Give me a reason," Silas growled. Kincaid laughed, spitting blood. "Doesn't matter if you kill me, Thorne. Look at the window." Silas looked. Across the street, at the hotel, smoke was rising. "Sterling sold you out," Kincaid grinned. "He made a deal with Holt an hour ago. Why fight a war when you can split the profits? The girl is the loose end." "Eleanor!" Silas knocked Kincaid cold with the pistol butt and sprinted for the hotel. He found her on the second-floor balcony, pinned down by gunfire from Sterling's hired guns. Sterling himself was shouting orders from the street. "Kill them both! Make it look like a robbery!" Silas kicked open the door to the suite, firing 2 rounds that took down the gunman in the hall. He grabbed Eleanor. "We have to jump." From the second floor, "Trust me." They leaped, crashing into the canvas awning of the mercantile below, rolling onto the dusty street. Bullets chewed up the dirt around them. They scrambled onto Midnight, Silas pulling Eleanor up behind him. They tore out of Trinidad with a posse hot on their heels. "Where do we go?" Eleanor shouted over the wind. "West!" Silas yelled back. "California! The law doesn't reach that far." They rode until the horses were blown. Then they walked. They crossed the desert, dodging patrols, eating rattlesnake meat and prickly pear. They forged a new life in the crucible of the wasteland. Somewhere near the border of Arizona, they found a circuit judge who married them for a bottle of whiskey. They ceased to be Silas Thorne and Josephine Whitmore. They became Thomas and Margaret Harper. The Napa Valley sun was softer than the Kansas glare. It filtered through the leaves of the oak trees shading the porch of the Harper Ranch. Margaret, formerly Eleanor, stood on the porch, rocking a cradle. Inside slept baby Sarah. Margaret wore a simple cotton dress, her hands calloused from work, her face lined by the sun, but glowing with a peace she had never known in Boston. Thomas, formerly Silas, walked up from the vineyards, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked at his wife and child, and the old ghosts of the war were silent. "Rider coming," Thomas said quietly. Margaret looked up. A lone figure on a white horse was coming up the lane. He moved slowly, an old man bent by time. Judge Cornelius Vance stopped at the gate. He looked at the ranch, the thriving vines, the child in the cradle. He looked at the daughter who had defied him, and the man he had sent to protect her. He dismounted stiffly. "I was told," the judge rasped, his voice a shadow of its former boom, "that a Mr. Harper grew the finest grapes in the valley." "He does," Margaret said, standing tall. "Can we help you, stranger?" The judge looked at her. His eyes watered. "I realize something, Eleanor. I realize that power is a cold bedfellow." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a thick envelope. "Holt and Sterling turned on each other, destroyed each other. I managed to salvage this." He placed the envelope on the porch railing. "Deeds, trusts, for the child." "We don't need your money," Thomas said hard. "I know," the judge smiled sadly. "That is why you deserve it." He tipped his hat. "She looks like her mother, Eleanor. You have done well." The judge turned to leave. "Father," Eleanor called out. The old man stopped. "Stay for dinner. We have plenty." The judge turned back, tears finally spilling over. "I would like that very much." As the sun set, casting long shadows once again, the family sat around a rough-hewn table. They were scarred, they were changed, but they were whole. The frontier had tried to break them, but instead, it had forged them into something unbreakable. Thanks for reading this epic tale of the Wild West. If you found yourself rooting for Silas and Eleanor, please give this story a thumbs up and share it with a friend who loves a good romance.